Japan's history underwent a significant shift in the middle of the 1800s. The arrival of Western powers put a stop to its long-standing strategy of isolation. Admiral Matthew Perry entered Edo Bay in 1853 with 4 armed ships, 2 of which were steam-powered, and came back with 9 ships. Japan was compelled to open up to the world as a result of this display of military and technological might. However, the conditions were not equal. Japan negotiated treaties in response to the overwhelming strength of the West, beginning with the Treaty of Kanagawa with the United States in 1854 and continuing with economic deals in 1858. These unequal treaties allowed foreign trade in Japanese ports, but they also severely restricted Japan's sovereignty by imposing extraterritoriality and limiting its control over tariffs. According to Western norms, international law at the time classified the world's countries as civilized, semi-civilized, and uncivilized. Japan was classified as semi-civilized, whereas the United States and Europe were considered civilized. Because Westerners considered Japanese judicial systems, such as unrepresented trials and severe penalties, to be subpar, they felt that their rules should be applied to their nationals even in Japan. Therefore, in agreements with nations like the United States, the Netherlands, Russia, Britain, and France, Japan had to relinquish control over its tariffs and accept extraterritoriality, which meant that foreign laws applied to Westerners in Japan. The impact of extraterritoriality was significant. It meant that foreigners in Japan were subject to their own consular courts rather than Japanese law. As a result, foreigners were granted benefits that Japanese citizens were not, undermining Japan's legal authority. It was similar to having foreign enclaves in Japan that were not under local authority, weakening Japan's hold on its own people and territory. It was equally detrimental to lose tariff autonomy. Because it was unable to impose its own import and export duties, Japan found it difficult to shield its fledgling sectors from lower-priced imports. For instance, American and British imports caused problems for Japanese cotton and silk manufacturers. This hindered industrial development, increased Japan's economic reliance on Western nations, and reduced government revenue, all of which further diminished Japan's financial independence. The Tokugawa shogunate, a hereditary regime headed by a shogun from the Tokugawa family and in power since 1603, dominated Japan in the 1850s and 1860s. From 1633 to 1854, the shogunate imposed a rigorous policy of national isolation, restricting international interaction to regulated trade with Dutch traders at Nagasaki's Dejima. Because of this seclusion, even senior officials had limited knowledge of other countries and contemporary legal frameworks when negotiating treaties. They didn't start to understand the fundamentals of international law until 1857, when they had discussions with Townsend Harris, the American consul general. In 1863, the shogunate dispatched 2 young officials, Amain Nishi and Masamichi Suda, to study contemporary law in the Netherlands in order to fill this vacuum. Up until 1865, they studied Dutch and went to lectures twice a week at the house of a professor from Leiden University. They studied economics, statistics, international law, constitutional law, and natural law, primarily civil law. After their return, Nishi and Suda wrote legal works and counseled Yoshinobu Tokugawa, the last shogun. But the Tokugawa shogunate quickly fell, thus their influence was minimal. Yoshinobu resigned and pledged allegiance to the emperor in 1867. The Meiji Restoration, which restructured Japan's government the next year, placed authority under imperial control. This change in power was symbolized by the emperor's relocation from Kyoto to Tokyo in 1869. The goal of the new Japanese administration was to swiftly establish Japan as a contemporary, globally acknowledged sovereign nation. This objective guided modernization efforts, with a particular emphasis on establishing a contemporary legal system and legislative framework as essential pillars. The government established the Iwakura Mission, headed by Tomomi Iwakura, to assist with this. This mission of over 150 officials visited 12 nations, including the United States, Britain, France, Russia, Germany, Austria, and Italy, between November 1871 and September 1873. The mission's objectives were to undertake diplomatic trips for the new administration and research other countries for modernizing ideas. They spoke with foreign dignitaries and wrote in-depth reports back to Japan detailing their impressions. Following the journey, Iwakura concluded that the ideal example for Japan's modernization was Germany, a new imperial power. Seeing Germany as a model for Japan's future, the team was especially impressed by Chancellor Otto von Bismarck and the collaborative relationship between the Kaiser and the Chancellor. The 1889 Constitution, the 1898 Civil Code, and other legal frameworks that largely referenced German ideals were influenced by this. However, in order to avoid becoming overly reliant on any one nation, Japan adopted a diverse modernization strategy. For instance, Germany provided the legal system, medical research, and military organization, Scotland provided the engineering and shipbuilding, France provided the bureaucracy and administrative law, and Britain provided the postal system, railroads, and roads. Japan's emphasis on maintaining its independence and avoiding hegemony by any one foreign power was reflected in this policy. Japan implemented significant reforms, such as establishing a contemporary legal system and legislative structure, while simultaneously promoting military and industrialization in an effort to be recognized as a modern, civilized country by Western standards. With the United States, Britain, and other countries, the administration started negotiating treaty amendments. The late 19th and early 20th century saw the fruits of these labors. Japan persuaded Western countries to amend the unfair accords through diplomacy, modernization, and expanding military might. When extraterritoriality was outlawed in 1899, Japan's legal authority over its territory was reinstated. Japan was released from economic restraints and permitted to pursue its own economic policies when it won complete tariff autonomy in 1911. The process of revising the treaty was linked to Japan's larger modernization and nation-building initiatives. At the same time, Japan expanded its empire by annexing Korea in 1910 and Taiwan in 1895. These significant events signaled a sea change, regaining Japan's independence and solidifying its position as a major world power. Despite their early limitations, the unfair treaty served as a catalyst for Japan's change. Japan's resolve to overcome these restrictions was strengthened by its experience of unfair treatment by Western countries. Rapid industrialization, military expansion, and social changes were fueled by national pride and the need to amend the treaties. Japan waged expensive battles to win Western recognition as a civilized country under international law, since diplomacy alone was insufficient. The cost of pursuing treaty revision was significant. Japan lost more than 100,000 people in two significant wars, one against Russia in 1904 to 1905, and the other against China in 1894 to 1895. The Russo-Japanese War alone cost over 10 times Japan's annual budget, resulting in a huge financial burden that started in 1906 and continued until 1986. Ironically, the unfair treaties not only initially restricted Japan's sovereignty but also helped it become a strong, modern nation. Let's talk about the context of the post-war occupation. Following Japan's surrender in World War II, General Douglas MacArthur's Allied forces, primarily the United States, occupied the country for 7 years, from 1945 to 1952. Japan's sovereignty reached a low point during this time. The occupation, which lasted from September 1945 to April 1952, changed Japan's political, economic, and social structures by enforcing stringent demilitarization and democratic measures. A new pacifist and democratic constitution, a redesigned educational system that eliminates militaristic ideas and promotes democracy, land reforms that redistribute farmland and empower farmers, the legalization of trade unions to support workers, and modifications to the family system that challenge patriarchal norms were just a few of the extensive reforms implemented by the United States. Rebuilding Japan as a democratic, peaceful country was the goal of these changes. Some contend, however, that these adjustments, together with stringent regulations, also acted as retaliation for Japan's actions during the war. The preservation of Japan's pre-war bureaucracy was a significant holdover. Throughout the transition, the U.S. depended on the structure and experience of this system to efficiently manage the nation and implement changes. The strategic environment in East Asia was altered by the Cold War and growing hostilities between the U.S. and the USSR, particularly following the Chinese Revolution of 1949 and the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. The United States started to view Japan as an important ally in keeping communism in check rather than as a vanquished foe. This change led to a reconsideration of American occupation tactics, which paved the way for Japan's sovereignty to be restored. The Treaty of San Francisco, which was signed on September 8, 1951, formally ended the Allied occupation of Japan in 1952 by restoring its sovereignty. However, the Japan-U.S. Security Treaty was signed concurrently in 1951, marking the return of independence. This agreement served as the cornerstone of Japan's post-war security strategy and was centered on the stationing of American forces in Japan to uphold peace and security in the Far East. Although it restricted Japan's military independence, the pact gave it a crucial security assurance during the stressful Cold War era. The Security Pact and Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which was drafted by the occupation authorities and forbade war, limited Japan's capacity to establish a completely autonomous armed forces. The treaty limited Japan's defense policy autonomy even while it guaranteed protection. A change toward a more equitable alliance was signaled by the 1960 modification of the Japan-U.S. Security Treaty. An amended position of soldiers agreement that clarified the legal position of U.S. soldiers, a requirement that the U.S. notify Japan before utilizing its bases for operations abroad, and an explicit U.S. commitment to defend Japan were among the major revisions. These modifications strengthened Japan's security, promoted collaboration between the two countries, and solidified the treaty as the cornerstone of Japan's defense strategy, influencing its security strategy and the country's relationship with the United States for many years. Although there have been discussions over the pact throughout the years, it is certain that Japan benefited much from the post-war security agreement with the United States. Even though it needed to change its security stance, this allowed Japan to concentrate on economic expansion and expanding its diplomatic influence. The enduring impact of this post-war settlement continues to shape Japan's sovereignty and its role in the global system. A crucial component of the Security Treaty, the Japan-U.S. Status of Forces Agreement, SOFA, outlines the specifics of the American military's deployment in Japan and identifies restrictions on Japan's legal and territorial sovereignty. The primary forum for talks between the United States and Japan over the American military presence in Japan is the Japan-U.S. Security Consultative Committee, which was established under the Status of Forces Agreement, SOFA. The committee, which is composed of officials from both countries, manages operational concerns, settles conflicts, and makes sure the security arrangement functions properly. Although its influence on security policy is well known, its lack of organization and openness has come under fire. High-ranking representatives from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, headed by the Director General of the North American Affairs Bureau, are on the Japanese side. The Deputy Commander of U.S. Forces Japan leads the U.S. side, which is composed of military personnel and the Minister of the U.S. Embassy in Japan. This implies that talks between Japan's foreign ministry and the U.S. Embassy frequently take place outside of official diplomatic channels, which raises fears that military goals could take precedence over more important political or diplomatic matters. The committee's closed-door discussions are opaque, according to critics. Since 1952, official minutes have been confidential. Only 84 joint statements are accessible to the public on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website. The reason for this confidentiality is a 1960 agreement that states that minutes are official records of both governments and cannot be made public without both parties' approval. Because of this, the Japanese population is unaware of the debates and choices that have a big impact on their daily life and the security of the country. Former Foreign Minister Katsuya Okada blasted the arrangement during a parliamentary debate, claiming that agreements between the Deputy Commander of U.S. Forces Japan and the Director of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs violate Japan's Public Records Management Act of 2009 and the Information Disclosure Act of 2001. The purpose of these legislation is to guarantee appropriate record-keeping and public access to government information. Japan's capacity to adequately assert its national interests is called into doubt by the lack of transparency and the seeming imbalance of influence. Some contend that important choices about American military involvement in Japan are made behind closed doors, evading democratic responsibility and public scrutiny. The committee is crucial to the alliance, but it also allows the United States to exert influence over Japan's security and defense strategies. This demonstrates how Japan's sovereignty is subject to important but subtle restrictions under the alliance structure. Some even claim that the committee functions outside the bounds of the Japanese constitution, which would be a grave infringement on Japanese sovereignty if it were true. Japan's post-war security agreements with the United States boosted economic expansion, but they also curtailed its sovereignty and caused conflicts within its own borders. These difficulties are highlighted by 4 significant incidents. The Girard Incident of 1957. This incident sparked a debate regarding jurisdiction under the SOFA after a Japanese woman was murdered by a U.S. soldier at a U.S. Army fire range. The United States first asserted control, but following discussions in the Japan-US Committee, they let Japan to bring charges. A Japanese court found the soldier guilty and sentenced him to a suspended term. In the 1959 Kanagawa case, 7 demonstrators were prosecuted for breaking the rules of the Japan-US Security Treaty by invading a U.S. military installation. They were exonerated by a Tokyo court that claimed the American military presence went against Japan's pacifist constitution. Citing the act of state doctrine, which forgoes judicial examination of highly politicized matters such as the Security Treaty, the Supreme Court reversed this decision and found the demonstrators guilty. Subsequently, declassified U.S. records revealed that the U.S. ambassador and Japan's Chief Justice had informal discussions. The Okinawa minor rape incident of 1995, this case revealed restrictions on Japan's criminal jurisdiction under the SOFA, which led to protests and public indignation. Criticism was stoked when the United States first refused to turn over suspects prior to indictment, as permitted by the SOFA. Demands to amend the SOFA to grant Japan greater authority over the prosecution of American military personnel for crimes committed in Japan grew stronger as a result of the incident. The Futenma base relocation issue. Although it is generally acknowledged that Futenma Air Base must be moved owing to safety and noise concerns, the planned relocation to Hinoko has sparked controversy. The difficulty of striking a balance between defense policies and community concerns is highlighted by the expensive construction, harm to marine ecosystems, and conflict between local autonomy and national security requirements. According to a 2004 estimate, there are 135 American military installations in Japan, which make up 0.27% of the country's total land area. Okinawa has the most, accounting for 10.43% of the total area, followed by Hokkaido, Kanagawa, Nagasaki, and Hiroshima. There is a great deal of local animosity and agitation as a result of this high concentration in Okinawa. Visit the Ministry of Defense website for the most recent information on American military installations. Domestic discussions concerning striking a balance between local issues, national security, and Japanese sovereignty are still fueled by the SOFA stipulations and the continuous U.S. military presence. With no simple answers in sight, problems including base relocation, environmental effects, the legal status of U.S. personnel, and Okinawa's disproportionate burden underscore the conflict between the advantages and limitations of Japan's security dependence on the U.S. The Japan-U.S. alliance has changed into a more cooperative cooperation, with Japan playing a bigger role as a result of China's growth and other post-Cold War developments. As a result of this change, the alliance is now a forum for regional leadership rather than restricting Japan's autonomy. In this context, Japan has improved its international status through strategic diplomacy. A crucial forum for addressing emerging security issues and coordinating on common objectives is the Japan-US 2+2 ministerial meetings, which bring together the foreign and defense ministers of both nations. Security cooperation has grown as a result of these sessions. On July 1, 2014, Japan made a significant shift by reinterpreting Article 9 of its constitution to permit both individual and collective self-defense. Concerns regarding Japan's possible involvement in regional crises are raised by this, as well as increased military integration. With alliances with Australia, India, and Vietnam, the alliance has now expanded across the Indo-Pacific region. For regional stability, the U.S. military presence in South Korea is still essential. A large cut might compel Japan and other East Asian countries to reconsider their security plans, which might lead to power voids and heightened tensions in the region. This demonstrates how precarious Japan's security is under the framework of its current restricted sovereignty. The security environment in the Far East is now more unpredictable due to recent U.S. actions, such as protectionist trade restrictions and a diminished emphasis on multilateral alliances. The relative stability of East Asia since the armistice of the Korean War in 1953 could be threatened by potential shifts in U.S. military commitments or alliance structures. The lack of information and the technical complexity of topics like defense capabilities and integrated Japan-US command systems make it harder for average folks to grasp national security policies. Despite the significance of these issues, this limits public participation by leaving security discussions and policies mostly in the hands of experts. In an effort to promote regional stability in the years following the Cold War and to pursue reciprocal strategic and economic advantages, Japan has fortified its security ties with the United States. This strategy has been continuously endorsed by the leaders of both countries. However, because of the U.S. military presence, Japan's diplomatic freedom is restricted, its foreign policy is aligned with U.S. interests, its independent military capabilities are limited, and its territorial and legal sovereignty is called into question. This dependence affects Japan's relations with other countries and its ability to pursue fully independent diplomacy. The long-term effects of this reliance on Japan's democracy and popular participation in sovereignty and foreign policy have drawn criticism from academics. Tensions between Japan's peaceful identity and demands for a more powerful military role are highlighted by the continuous discussion about Article 9, which establishes the country's pacifist stance. Japan must make decisions about its future based on fundamental sovereignty values as an independent country. To handle the geopolitical issues of today, experts contend that Japan's post-war security architecture needs to be re-evaluated. A transparent, forward-thinking strategy centered on accountability and integration with programs such as the Free and Open Indo-Pacific is necessary for the Japan-US alliance. Japan's participation in the Quad, which also includes Australia, India, and the United States, demonstrates that it supports American objectives while yet seeking more independence in a precarious international system. However, shifting U.S. policies and growing regional threats continue to limit Japan's strategic independence. The absence of public review of national security decisions in Japan is exacerbated by the 2013 Act on the Protection of Specially Designated Secrets. This law restricts free discussion on security-related topics and breeds public mistrust by enabling the government to categorize information in a wide range of ways and to punish leakers severely. This leads to a problem. Although national defense is important, its intricacy and secrecy hinder meaningful citizen participation, eroding the democratic values the alliance seeks to uphold. The development of a clear notion of sovereignty and independence, especially in education, has been slowed by Japan's strong reliance on the United States, which has influenced its security identity. Many residents accept these restrictions without examining their causes or effects, seemingly oblivious to how their nation's autonomy is restricted or what that actually means in reality. Scholars emphasize that one of the most important civic duties is to cultivate a strong feeling of sovereignty. Managing prospective changes to the Japan-US Security Treaty and other agreements within the existing framework is a significant problem going forward. Despite challenges, the necessity for greater openness and public participation in security policies is becoming increasingly acknowledged. These are crucial for preserving democratic norms and the alliance's strength, particularly in light of the uncertainty surrounding shifting U.S. foreign policy following presidential elections. Japan needs to maintain its flexibility while making sure that its democratic procedures inform long-term choices. Examining the past from 1854 to the present provides insightful guidance on how to deal with these issues and come up with more equitable solutions. For the sake of mutual gain and enduring peace, open public dialogue over the alliance's future is essential in both Japan and the United States. A well-rounded framework that is based on widespread acceptance promotes democratic consensus and enables citizens to hold governments responsible. Maintaining the alliance's democratic roots and ensuring future prosperity depend on this agreement. To guarantee that security doesn't jeopardize democracy, openness and understanding between generations must be fostered.